Hi guys and welcome back to Dice Down Gaming. Today's video is about clean play on a tabletop and why I think that's really important. Before I get into the main topic, a few things for me. First of all, thank you to anyone who's subscribed to my channel so far. I'm getting close to 400, which is just unbelievable. My next goal for YouTube is 500. I might unlock some things then, but let's push to 400. If you like what I'm doing or think my content's any good, I'd be really grateful for the subscription. Next off, had some comments that the audio was quite poor, which is fair enough because I was using a headset that I've been using for about 15 years. So I got myself a new microphone. If you think the audio is any good or improved, I'd love to hear that feedback in the comments. And lastly, but mainly, most importantly, look what arrived. How very cool. My Abyssal King arrived for my Brian Blood. So I'm going to work on that after I've done my lists for the Welsh. That's my main focus right now. And then after that, I will focus on him and get him painted. And picking a colour scheme is really important. You guys got any colour suggestions? What colour do you think would look good on the big boy? I'd love to hear that in the comments. Right, today's topic is keeping your play clean on the tabletop and why I think that's really important. So I think one thing we maybe is very easy to lose sight of and we maybe forget when we're playing a game is that when you play someone, at a tournament or a local pickup game to you, someone's offering their time to you. And time is really, really valuable. For example, once a week I go to the Chelmsford Club, local to me in Harlow. Play a game, which is probably about 3 hours. We have a chat, we grab a drink, we play a game, we're social. That 3 hours of someone's week is really important. People have things going on. I've had a really hard time recently. I've had some really tough news. Everyone's got things going on, and someone offering their time to you to play a game is an incredibly valuable thing to them. So we should just keep in mind that people's time is valuable. I mean, we should try and make that time as good as possible. And I think having that sort of mindset for each game will help us be a bit more positive and a more pleasant play experience over the table. And if everyone thinks that way, we're getting a really good place in terms of how we approach the game, not only in terms of playing the game, but realizing that our opponent is part of the game. They've given us their time, and we want to make that time as good as possible. So what are my sort of top tips and what I think is most important in being clean on the tabletop? Well, first of all, unsurprisingly, the first thing is communication. And I wouldn't blame you thinking, well, that's pretty obvious. It is. But if anyone's played sort of competitive card games, I've played a lot of Magic the Gathering. Sometimes communication completely stops. I've had games in Magic the Gathering where, we've said hello, how are you, how's your day been? The game has started, and then people are playing cards without literally saying anything. They tap their mana, they put a card, they might cast a spell and point to my card. I've had that less in tabletop gaming, but I've had games where we've been very social before we've started actually playing. We've asked how our day's been, how's your event going, and then when the game actually starts, communication almost breaks down. People will move a model and maybe not say how far they've moved it, or they'll cast a spell and then they will say they won't give me a target. And I'm sure it's not an intentional thing. In a game of, say, War Machine or Sigma or 40k, quite often you can be playing on a clock now, and I understand that people want to not give up time where they can. But it's really important, and it'll really help your opponent to understand what's going on if we're all very clear with what we want to do. For example, turn one, if I'm going to run Ragemonger to this position here, say I'm going to, you can quickly say I'm going to run Ragemonger, but give him the distance. I'm going to run him 11, run him 12, whatever the distance is. That can give your opponent very quickly an idea of how far you're up on the table without asking you a question. If you're going to cast a spell, say Ragemonger is going to cast Fortify. Rather than just saying that, let's give my opponent a target who I'm going to cast it on. And I know most of the time, this might happen, but I've had games where sometimes things are a bit unclear, and someone just said, I'm moving here and I'm casting this. It's great to give your opponent as much information as possible. Obviously, I'm not expecting people to, give them their full game plan. I'm going to move here turn one, and I plan to move here turn two, and my plan is to do this and this and that. But just be clear on what you are doing or what you have done. I think that's really, really important. not only for playing clean, so your opponent is fully aware what's going on, but also I think for like a positive experience for both you and your opponent. If you have cast a spell and you haven't declared your target and you've done it quickly, and your opponent isn't aware where that spell is on, and then suddenly they engage a model and this spell buffs them in a way they weren't aware because they weren't aware what model it was on. That can be really negative for you, and it can lead to asking for takebacks. And I think takebacks are really a lose-lose situation. If your opponent asks you for a takeback and you say no, you will suddenly, I think, you feel like a bit of a bad guy. And vice versa, if you do give your opponent the takeback, I think then you can sometimes feel hard done by because you've let them take this thing back. And that can all, I think, be negated with good communication from the start, being clear in what you're doing, where you're moving, what your targets are. I think that all makes a really big difference in being clean, but also letting your opponent be aware of everything that's going on. And I think secondly, that ties into really declaring intent. In these games where we're playing on a clock and things are getting down to the wire and you've got 10 minutes left for your whole turn, sometimes you might move things hastily and your measurements, aren't as precise as maybe you'd like them to be because you want to get your turn done in the time. I think that this is where declaring intent becomes really important. In this example here, say we've got this objective, and I'm playing a hasty turn. I've got 8 minutes left, and I've got 2 turns left to play. I want to throw some very quickly in range of this to contest it. I say I throw him there. I click there. That's my turn. Or in the real game, real life, you put him there. You think you're within 3. Great. You pass the clock over, and your opponent measures it, and you're not within 3. If we communicate clearly that our intent here is to have some within 3, I think people understand that sometimes under clock you're a bit hastily, and then there is no ask for a take back, or there is no being unclear. You've communicated clearly that you want some within 3. Okay, you might have put in 3.1 away because you were hasty, but I've in those situations 99% of the time I have my opponent say, yeah, no problem, I understand, you want to be within 3, nudge him an inch, no problem. Other similarly things, like I declare, my intent is that, say, this Frogger here, my intent is that I'm outside of 8 inches of this world guardian here. On the tabletop, if you're running out of time, you quickly do a measurement with a tape measure, for example, and it gets to their turn and they measure it maybe with a stick or something, and you're in. If you've declared that intent and your opponent's agreed, yeah, no problem, you want to be outside of 10, you're close enough, and then maybe you nudge your model back a tiny bit, or they just say, okay, you're out of 10 with a stick, that's no problem. But I think that all comes back to really clear communication and declaring your intent of your models. I would say if you can, with time, when time allows, and ideally always, try and be precise with your measurements. I really recommend widgets or measurement sticks rather than tape measures. It allows you to be that much more accurate. When you've got a tape measure over the top of a model, it can sometimes distort the actual measurement. If you lay a stick or a widget flat to the ground, you're getting a much more accurate measurement. So communication and declaring intent, I think, really, really important. They sort of go hand in hand. But if you are having a game where you are actively communicating with your opponent, say where you intend things to be or outside of a distance, that should alleviate a lot of problems in terms of any unclear events in the game. And I think it will maybe mainly remove a lot of sort of hard feelings or feel bad when your opponent has gone to activate a model or gone to do this sort of combination of things, and there's a model that you've not really clearly said there's a spell on, or you've not declared clearly how far you want to be in or out, and it can lead to a feel bad on your side. If you said, oh no, I wanted to be 10 inches out of this thing, you've not said that in your mind, okay, I think I'm roughly 10, then the opponent goes and they're within 10 of the thing that you wanted to keep out of 10, you might think, oh damn it, that's a bit rubbish. But if you've declared that intent to your opponent and you've measured to the best of your ability, there should be no situation where there is a feel bad or it's unclear. Next up, I think, is marking things. Marking things sort of ties into, again, clear communication and declaring intent. I think in War Machine, there is in the Steamroller pack, there is a line that says your effects have to be marked. In 40k or Sigma, I always recommend where you can, if you've got strategium on a unit that lasts for a round, or in Sigma you've got a spell that's going to last until your next hero phase, try and mark that with something, even if it's just a red token next to it. I've got some dry if I can say that correctly, dry wipe acrylic tokens, which are fantastic. I can just write stuff on and put them next to units, and my opponent at least aware that it's something on that unit. Don't get me wrong, I can't write sometimes a whole effect on my little token, but it will prompt my opponent to say, oh, what's that on that unit? Or, again, coming back to the clear communication, declaring intent, if I've clearly communicated, I've cast that spell, I know my opponent's heard that, they know what I targeted, and I've got a token on that unit. Again, everything's clean, my opponent knows the board state, I'm measuring it precisely as I can, I'm communicating all of that, and everything on my side of the table is marked. You can't really have any situations where the board state isn't clear to your opponent. Some effects are really critical. In War Machine, for example, some effects might let you make an advance when someone ends in a certain distance, or they might give you an attack when they hit you, which could push them out of melee range, etc. These effects, absolutely critical that you have them marked, so your opponent is aware of what is on your models at all times, and vice versa. You should be aware what is on your opponent's models at all times. And I think those three things sort of, again, they roll into each other. We're communicating clearly, we're declaring our intent, and anything we do is clearly marked in terms of a spell or a ability. On top of that, I think dice etiquette is something that is worth talking about before you start the game. I feel like everyone has got some sort of different interpretation of what is a cocked dice and what is not. And in my example, for example, anything that doesn't land completely flat, I just call cocked. Often when I go to a tournament, I'll bring a dice tray. This makes life really easy. If it rolls out of the dice tray because I'm doing some wild rolling, I'll re-roll it. But 10 things tend to in a dice tray end up not cocked, and that's nice and easy. If you haven't got a dice tray and your opponent hasn't got a dice tray, I would just, before the game starts, communicate really clearly what we're doing about dice. I've had games, I'm sure everyone's had games, where you're in the middle of the game, your opponent rolls a 5 and a 1. The 1 is it's not completely flat. You've not decided with your opponent how we're going to handle dice, and then you get that bit where he goes, oh no, I'll reroll it because that's cocked, and vice versa. You might do the same, and your opponent might think, oh, is that cocked? No, I don't know. How are we doing dice? I think that conversation is worth having before the game, and clearly saying, okay, well, if any dice isn't flat, let's re-roll it, or if they aren't flat, let's just keep it as it is. As long as your opponent knows, I think, how you're going to handle it before anything's re-rolled, I think that's the best way to go around it. It always tends to be that the first dice that could be re-rolled, is a 1 that might let you hit something, or suddenly it's a 6 and you'll re-roll it and you'll miss it and you'll feel bad. So again, that bit of communication with your opponent and saying this is how we're going to handle dice before the game starts, I think that's really important, and that will really help you with not so much clean play, but it will help you with no feel bad moments during the game, because I didn't think you were going to re-roll that, and now you've re-rolled it into a hit, and that's left a sour taste in my mind. Those sort of first 3 tenets, I think, are the most important. We're going to communicate clearly everything during the game. We're going to mark all our things very clearly so our opponent knows what's going on. And we're going to always declare our intent in terms of where we want our models to be, in terms of distances or objectives. That way, there can be no situation where your opponent isn't clear about your board state, and vice versa. You'll always be clear of your opponent's board state. Dice etiquette, not so much a clean thing, but let's remove any sort of sour taste from games when we're midway through. Let's have that conversation up front, and let's be clear about that before we start the game. I think, again, I'd like to reiterate, for myself and in others in the gaming community, that the game really is a social sort of cooperative experience between two people, and the game ultimately objective is to win, but the also objective is to enjoy that experience for both players, and we should actively both be trying to achieve that goal cooperatively and working together, so we both have a good time. Uh, I think I'll finish there. I hope you found that useful in terms of maybe trying to keep your tabletop play as clean as possible. I really appreciate you tuning in to another ramble from myself. Hopefully the audio was a bit better last time. I got a comment on one of my videos that the information was good, but the audio was horrible, which I think was great. I love honest feedback. I love any feedback. So if you've got any thoughts on keeping play clean, anything I haven't touched on, any of your own pro tips, drop them in the comments. And until the next one, guys, I'll see you soon.